So, welcome everybody to our Historical Alliance webinar 2026 Life Science Outlook, being hosted by Domino Data. It's going to be an interesting presentation today with lots of really good insights, I'm sure. Just before we begin, for those of you that don't know, this is a Pistoia Alliance webinar. We're a not-for-profit global organization. We're member-led that allows our member companies to work together without additional legal agreements. And the whole mission is to lower the barriers to innovation through pre-competitive collaboration. We bring people together, organizations together to sort of work, understand things. We run projects and webinars and events just to sort of make sure that, give people the best access to data and information. And as I say, where there's opportunities to work together, we support those opportunities and move things along. With that in mind, and this being an AI seminar, just thought I'd mention a couple of things that are going on in our world at the moment. We have a number of AI projects, and a couple of them mentioned here, our NLP and LLM project. And also, we're going to have a larger program of presentations this year. We're going to have 4 or 5 big webinars where we bring people together. And I'm also hoping to run a set of roundtable events looking at specific topics in AI and agentic AI that are causing people grief, or there's a lot of interest there. So that's something we were doing. If anybody's interested in any of these, please do feel free to drop myself or anybody at the Pistoia Alliance a note, and we will connect you to the right people. So that's enough about the Pistoia Alliance. Now for today's webinar, which is we're going to take a look at the trends shaping life science R&D, sort of hear about how data science, analytics and AI are evolving and what that means for teams planning their investment and execution. Learn what's changing, what matters, and how an organization can prepare for what is going to be a very interesting year in the world of AI and agentic AI, with lots of new things appearing, lots of new technologies, lots of opportunities, lots of risks and challenges as well. So on that point, I will stop sharing and I'll pass over to Chris to take it forward.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Rob. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. I'm excited about today. As Rob said, there's obviously a lot of interest in AI, how it could impact the industry, et cetera. So I'm especially excited to be joined by 2 folks who live and breathe AI data science day in and day out. So Jamie from Takeda and Tiffany from AZ. I guess I won't be able to do you all justice in terms of describing your history, how you got where you are, et cetera. So maybe Tiffany, you could go first, just give a quick 1-minute intro of who you are and what your scope is around AI and data science.
Yeah, I'm Tiffany Fabianic. I lead an initiative at AstraZeneca called FAIR Analytics. If you're familiar with FAIR data, we are looking at how to apply those FAIR principles to our analytics outcomes. So findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. And we've added an additional R for reproducibility. We do think that the focus on being able to reproduce our analytics outcomes is critical as we continue to adopt AI trends and continue to improve our research and our foundations for bringing medicines to patients.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Tiffany. Jamie?
Hi, Jamie O'Keefe. I head up development and regulatory data, digital, and technology at Takeda. So I have responsibility for all things technology and AI across clinical operations, regulatory, and our PV organization.
Excellent. Yeah. So, and I'm Chris Experience. I head up strategy for our life sciences vertical at Domino. We are an AI and data science platform that supports the life science industry from science through commercialization. Had the pleasure of working with Tiffany and her team, and I've known Jamie for a long, long time. So that's why I'm excited about today's discussion, being able to talk about how we're actually seeing tangible benefits, some of the trends we're seeing, et cetera. And I think that transitions nicely into today's agenda. First, I'll talk about where we are and how we got here. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on that, but just understanding, hey, there's obviously been a lot of change in technology around AI. We all hear the news, things like that. So what's changed over about the past year and a half, et cetera. understanding where AI is today, where it's delivering value, where we're seeing maybe some hiccups or bumps. And then start looking forward into the future a little bit, talk about some predictions we have for the next year or so. We didn't try to get too far in the future because at the pace of evolution of technology, it would be kind of foolish to look years and years in advance because I think we'd all be way off in our predictions. But I think tied to that understanding that, hey, things are rapidly changing, et cetera, we're going to spend some time thinking about, hey, how should leaders prepare and support AI initiatives within the organization. So that's our overall topic. And obviously, we're expecting a lot of enthusiasm and excitement from you all. So we've definitely built in some time for some Q&A at the end. Okay, before I get into actually some of the questions, some of the topics I wanted to talk about, we do have two quick polling questions for you all to understand where you are from an organizational perspective, from a personal perspective, to allow us to potentially tailor or tweak some of our messaging, but also just to get a better understanding of how we address some of these things. So I guess the first polling question we have is, where is your organization with AI today? So obviously it's a wide range. It's, hey, we're exploring a little bit. We've done a little bit from a pilot perspective. We've gone whole hog and we have it embedded across lots of workflows, or we're not really sure. There's different teams are doing different things, which is a common thing. So if you could just answer this question real quick. All right, that's probably enough time. You could, I guess, close it. And I'll share, bring it over, share some, oh, not yet on this slide. So yeah, so I guess from a poll perspective, this is about what I expected to see. Again, we see a lot of folks exploring use cases. And again, I think that's perfectly valid. And we'll talk about that from a regulated industry perspective, why we might be a little slower than other industries to adopt AI. But we have a lot of folks, almost half who've explored some use cases, are doing some pilots. Probably about a third, a little less than a third, are actually scaling it into production use, which is awesome. And then what's exciting to me is we actually have about 20% of people have it embedded in multiple workflows. So that's some great progress. So I'll be interested to see maybe some questions around those of how you've done it, or maybe some insights around that. But no, that's some great things right now about where you are now. I think the second poll you see on the screen now that will launch is, for those of you who've made a lot of progress, or those of you who are still just exploring, what is your biggest barrier to scaling AI? Is your biggest challenge, hey, we just don't have the data infrastructure in place, the data readiness, the data standards, et cetera. Is your organization very concerned or putting a priority on compliance and governance? Is the technology itself your sort of challenge right now? Is that your hurdle, the technology, the infrastructure, et cetera? Or is it more about, hey, we just are struggling from an organizational perspective, the change management, the training, et cetera? All right, we could probably close it up. All right, another one that does not surprise me especially much. So for coming in first in terms of the biggest challenge, data readiness and standards. So making sure you have sort of the fuel to feed the fire of AI. That's obviously a big thing. We'll talk about that during our session is, hey, what is the data readiness challenge? What do you have to do to get ready for that? So obviously that does not surprise me at all. Governance and compliance coming in second also doesn't surprise me, knowing again that we're in a heavily regulated industry. Our quality teams, our regulatory teams are rightfully so big influencers on how we adopt technology, how we change our process, et cetera. That coming in at second does not surprise me. And coming in third, change management. Yeah, I think that's perfectly valid. Again, AI has the potential to change a heck of a lot of how we organize, about how we execute work, et cetera. So those being the top three, do not surprise me, nor does it surprise me that technology is finally becoming less and less of a hurdle. If we had probably done this webinar 6 months ago, 12 months ago, many people have had technology as the biggest challenge. So I think the challenges that we see right now aligns with what we're hearing from customers. And I think that that reflects a lot of where we are now, again, from an overall trend perspective. I think as people answering their polling question, AI is moving from experimentation to adoption. It's no longer just, hey, we have one person in the IT department or a data science team running an experiment on their laptop, implementing something in a virtual machine, et cetera. We actually have workflows, either, and we'll talk about the different types of workflows, we have AI in use during production processes. I don't mean the full process is automated, but we have actual use in processes that are being used to help bring drugs to market. So between drug discovery through doc research, et cetera, and the commercial side, actually having AI being used to impact the processes and the bottom line of how an organization works. I think that definitely reflects what we're seeing. I think the second one, value shifting from model performance to workflow impact, I think to me, this ties a little bit to the technology. Again, we all know if we looked at ChatGPT 3 years ago, 3 years ago when it first came out, it got some stuff right, but it got a heck of a lot of stuff wrong. It hallucinated a heck of a lot. It didn't have the knowledge base that we would expect, et cetera. And every time new models are coming out, they know more. They're more capable. They have reasoning capabilities. So the technology and model performance, while still drastically improving every seems like every week, that's no longer where we're seeing the impact to the value is necessarily the new models. It's how do we actually embed them in our workflows? How do we operationalize them, et cetera? That's where we're seeing the value in terms of making the AI real for an organization. And I think despite the fact that AI is working really hard, that it's doing a really good job, we're continuing to see, obviously, I talked about earlier, we're in a very heavily regulated industry that tends to adopt things a little slower than some other industries, that we are adopting AI cautiously. But I think as you saw in the poll results, we are leaning a little bit more into it than we would in the past. We have some confidence. We've seen our peers be successful around it. We've seen, heck, I think a lot of the fact that we see it at work, at home. Again, everyone has ChatGPT, Gemini, et cetera, on their phone, on their computer. They're seeing the value it provides to them, their kids, their parents, et cetera. I think people have more trust or more confidence that technology can provide benefit. So I think we're seeing teams adopt it on the business side just because of the familiarity on the personal or consumer use side. And I think the last, again, we talked a little bit about workflows, how it builds into the team process, et cetera. I think the other thing that's important, and again, being in a regulated industry, is we have to build in whenever we deploy AI, heck, whenever we build any technology, be it RPA, predictive algorithms, analytics, things like that. It's not about necessarily the data we share. It's about the data that we can trust. So how do we actually embed trust, evidence, compliance into the AI workflows so that regulators can be happy with it, that your quality team can be happy, but also that the business that you're running, the processes that you're running, you have confidence that you are doing the right thing. So I think we've seen a lot of shift over the past 18 months. And I want to say, maybe I'll bring in Jamie and Tiffany right now. I guess Tiffany first. From your perspective, what made AI something that had to be done or that you all started embracing more and not just thinking about it, hey, we'll pilot here or there or we're experiment. What was sort of the tipping point for you all that said, hey, this is something we have to take seriously?
Yeah, I think once we recognize, and whether we're talking about AI or we're talking about other technologies, once we recognize that a technology can have a significant impact on patient critical outcomes, there's really no other choice than for us to take action and to do what we can to implement these technologies within our workflows. And when we're thinking about AI, when we're thinking about new development and how this technology can support our research and development, our clinical trial life cycles, our market access to patients. We're not thinking really about a big bang approach. This isn't a huge program that one program we're going to launch and then we're going to spin up something that solves all of our problems. We're talking about dozens, hundreds of tiny incremental changes throughout each of these workflows where we're integrating different AI tools, different AI technologies to improve the overall life cycle from discovering a promising target to actually delivering a drug to patients. We're looking at how all of these incremental changes can help us reduce our cycle times in clinical trials, can help us reduce our market access approvals. And what that ultimately provides is an increase in the quality of patients' lives. Say we implement all of these incremental changes and maybe one change reduces a timeline by 2 days, a timeline by a week. As we add these up, we're looking at potentially reducing our clinical trials by a year and getting medicine to patients who are suffering from potentially fatal diseases, certainly diseases that impact their quality of life. As we make these incremental changes, it becomes absolutely critical to those patients, to their families, in improving their quality of life.
I appreciate it, Tiffany, and I think I couldn't agree more. I think a lot of times people are like, "Hey, we're going to implement this tool, and we're going to save 30% time savings or cost savings," which oftentimes is very wishful thinking. I completely agree with your statement around compounding, sort of compounding interest, compounding benefits of, hey, we do a little bit here, we do a little bit here. Then when you sum it up in total, you could have significant benefits. And I think, Jamie, that sort of comes to you. You and I have chatted about this before, but I guess also when you think about how you deploy AI, big bang, little part, as Tiffany mentioned, hey, we could solve this little problem, we could solve this little problem. How did it show up within Takeda? Was there more of a, hey, we're going to deploy this monolithic solution to solve everything? Or were individual teams sort of taking the lead and figuring out, hey, how do we improve our day-to-day life?
Yeah, I mean, definitely over the past 18 months to 2 years, it's been very decentralized. So be it, kind of larger-ish initiatives around generative AI of regulated content, right? Like, which still ends up being pretty document use case specific, or just, right, different teams just saying like, I need to leverage AI to search for information better or generate content better or things like that. So it's definitely been kind of smaller evolutionary impacts. I think there was a big desire from the executive side to like, hey, we're gonna easy button a clinical study report, right? Like get 100% author, Gen AI authored. So I think there was this weird disconnect of like expectations of the transformative nature. But I would say now we are looking at it kind of on two tracks. One is the, hey, let's squeeze the value and the efficiency we can kind of out of the way we work today with smaller implementations of AI, but then also look at it more transformative from the way we do our jobs, right? Like, so how do we look at 5 years from now? What is a study manager, right? Like, do we foundationally change the roles within the organization and how we operate based off of the opportunity to have agentic AI and automation and AI? So how can we really less so build a monolithic AI program, but build a monolithic program on how do we change the way we do R&D as an organization? We at Takeda have a little bit, I guess, the benefit right now of we are heavily outsourced and are on a journey to change that. So we don't have a legacy organization and set of processes that are harder to move just because they've been there, right? Like, so we have an opportunity to hopefully leapfrog that. And look at it from the standpoint of, hey, I can take a whole bunch of work out that nobody does today within Takeda, right? Like, and hand that over to agentic AI. And we're hoping that from a change management and cultural perspective, if we do that now before we create these roles in-house, there isn't that friction and that fear of job loss and all the crazy things that LinkedIn says that we're going to lay off 50% of the world because agents are going to do the work.
No, that's good, and we'll get into that sort of that second probably phase or second perspective in a minute. I guess I want to come back to you said earlier, originally leadership had this big perspective of, hey, we're going to have these huge stepwise changes and impacts, things like that. And it wound up being a bunch of, as Tiffany said, a bunch of little things here, a little thing there. How was the reaction to senior leadership once they realized, hey, we're not going to all of a sudden have the 20% change. It might be each process or each step is 5-10% better, but overall that's still a significant impact.
Yeah, it kind of all changed rapidly, right? Like, and I think there was I think the messaging in the world changed a little bit, right? Like from going to it's going to be a change in 24 hours. But I also think they saw how hard it was to do even the smaller changes from a process standpoint and from an adoption standpoint. And then a lot of the little experiments were starting to save time or make quality better, right? Like they were making real impacts. They came out of like, hey, we're going to play in a lab somewhere, right? Like to operations people were pushing to do this work because they saw that it was saving their time and allowing us to do higher throughput, right? Like, and those things. So I think seeing that there was impactful value, even if it is smaller, was a pretty big watershed moment, at least within R&D.
All right, excellent. And I guess that's where we want to talk a little bit about, again, where is value being seen? I think, Tiffany, you talked about, hey, you're seeing it across the board from all the way in science when you're identifying new potential targets, things like that. JB, obviously, a lot of your focus is more on the development side, so clinical trial execution, regulatory, et cetera. But again, obviously, we're seeing and our customers are deploying AI. And again, AI is a bucket term. Again, a lot of the hype right now is around Gen AI, but I also think about machine learning, NLP. There's lots of flavors of AI. But even Gen AI is being used for a lot of these different things. I talked about all the models are evolving. There's biology-specific foundation models, things like that. Obviously, the ability to extract documents, information from documents is a huge thing, a huge value that a lot of people didn't necessarily anticipate going into it. So I guess, Jamie, from your perspective, obviously you're more on the development side. Where are you all seeing the most sustained value right now?
Yeah, I mean, in the short term, there's really two areas. Automation, obviously, right? Like particularly if you look on the clinical side, there is a lot of transactional activity that historically has not been well tech enabled, right? Like, so we are getting a lot of short-term gains on if we could just automate this transactional step or updating this information where we are piloting right now an agentic agent for data stewardship, right? Like, so how do we do the research that's necessary to go like, well, is this investigator really this investigator kind of a thing, and automating that kind of brute force work that we have to do. And then the other areas I talked about is in Gen AI. So how do we take, and a little bit of the automation, right? Like, how do we just do the cut and paste that we always do in order to create a clinical study report or a submission document, right? Like, and automate that, and then start to look at how do we truly do the generative AI authoring. But a lot of it is really just that. How do we do the transactional work and automate that as much as possible? Because it's faster right now. It's easier to implement. It's more safe. I see a question about how do you GXP AI solutions. But the other side of it is it's safe from a human perspective. Nobody wants to do that work, right? Like, so everybody's happy if we can get rid of that and they're not threatened by it.
No, definitely. And I guess the question, obviously, you talked a lot about automation, a lot about doing things. Was that because those processes were well understood? And you talked a little bit earlier about like, hey, it's optimizing processes versus re-engineering or reimagining process. So did you start with the processes that you're like, hey, we know how to do this. We could do this in our sleep. It's just painful and no one wants to do it. Were those sort of the process that you all latched onto first?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's we talk a lot at Takeda about, like making today better while we look at what tomorrow is. So it was very much the how do we not really change the business process, right? Like from a larger level, but just make it more efficient or more compliant or of higher quality. Because again, there's less friction in doing that from a change perspective. But then it's also looking at those things and we're willing to do those things right now, even if that means we're going to change that or maybe throw that away later. We just assess it on, hey, if we can get value over the next 12 months, that's good enough, right? Like if I can hit a tipping point in 12 months, I'm willing to invest in that, even if it means potentially we throw that whole thing away, because we are revolutionizing that business process.
All right, excellent. I guess Tiffany, more on the research side, obviously, I guess similar question for you is, oh, I have two questions. I guess the first question is the types of processes or the types of capabilities that you all tackled initially, were those ones that were ripe for, I'll call it automation or attacking because they were just so well understood and just so well, I don't want to say despised, but not exciting work? Or did you actually try to find sort of greenfield where like, hey, this would be really cool and just re-engineer or reinvigorate how we do things completely? Like sort of how did you decide where to focus on?
So I think the initial approach that is defined within standard business change management is you define the way that your workflow is right now. And then you look for opportunities where you can simplify, where you can add in a little automation. You can add in maybe a new piece of software that's going to help you perform that task. But I think as we see these more and more advanced AI technologies come out, that standard business change management that we're all familiar with no longer works, because we're not really thinking about how do we modify our current workflow when we're looking at some of these very advanced AI tools. We need to start thinking about how do we change the way that we actually work with these tools? How do we potentially change the way that our researchers are focusing, partnering with a potentially autonomous research partner, right? And I think that secondary change is going to be much harder to implement. There's going to be a lot of resistance, a lot of hesitation, because it does change the way that our scientists, our analysts are doing their jobs now. But ultimately, I think the future of AI is not my current workflow with AI embedded in it. It's a completely different workflow because of what AI enables us to do.
No, definitely. Yeah. So I think the future is both really exciting and a little bit scary at the same time for a lot of folks. But I guess to date, for the changes, the process that you have decided to reinvigorate with AI, where have you seen scientists or the impact on the scientists or the analysts right now? Where has their life changed the most because of AI?
Yeah, I think if I can paint a little bit of a picture here in terms of just how scientists approach design of experiments, right? So there is a statistical software called JMP, which I learned how to use in my undergrad. I did a statistics undergrad, and this software provides for you the ability to enter your variables, enter the ranges of the variables that you want to consider, and then it will produce for you a full multifactorial experimental protocol. And this software was released in 1989, right? So we've had software that can support our design of experiments for well over 30 years now. I don't imagine that JMP was the very first technology. It's just the one that I'm familiar with, right? But since scientists have had this for over 30 years, if you're familiar with how scientists are performing their experimentation in the lab, a lot of them still prefer that single factor experiment. And why is that? Because it's so much easier to understand. And it's so much easier for the human brain to conceptualize, I have changed one variable and this is the outcome. Whereas if you're thinking about designing multifactorial experiments, you're potentially changing multiple variables and then relying on a software to help you to understand the statistical responses for those interactions that have changed based on the outcome, right? And what I think our scientists need to change is how they use AI tools to help them deal with this complexity. I don't really think that there was a challenge in how we were running experiments. The challenge was, how are our scientists able to handle the complexity of the experimental protocols that we potentially can run with the support of AI partners. And I think that as we help our scientists to understand how to manage this complexity through their workflows, over time, they can start to focus less on those low value tasks, right? Less on planning the protocol, thinking about what format they need to have their results and thinking about the data output, and more on those high value tasks, thinking about the actual experimental design trade-offs and the cross-functional collaboration and what actually happens to their results next in the workflow after they have potentially defined a target.
No, I like that. And I think that's one of the things, again, you hear a lot about AI, but also technology, but having implemented technology for about 20 years in the industry. I think there's always the fear, as Jamie alluded to earlier, like, hey, we're all going to lose our jobs. We're going to be able to outsource. We're going to be able to get rid of half the people because technology is going to replace it. I've always viewed it as technology allows the smart people we have employed within the industry to live up and act against the things that are more challenging. Actually having perspective, critical thinking. I think, again, we could all copy and paste, we could all file documents, we could all create a experiment plan, things like that, like filling out the forms. But I think to your point, it's actually using that higher level reasoning and thinking. It frees up more time for that, which I think is exciting for many folks. And I think that goes to some of what, if I could get to the next slide, where we're seeing people, again, we talked earlier about, hey, there's been so much hype. Everyone, you open up LinkedIn, every single post is about AI. I listen to a podcast, half of them are how AI is going to make people obsolete, that the way you're thinking of your whole reality is changed now. And I think there's been a lot of hype around it, but I think there are tactical things that you can do to make the hype actually value for your organization. I think the first one, you both sort of nailed and have talked about already. Like, hey, don't try to eat the whole elephant at once. Have a scope that's manageable, being able to understand the process, being able to understand who's executing it, things like that. When you sort of know what size of the breadbox you're dealing with, it allows you to actually apply the right technology. And AI is oftentimes the right technology for it. But I think having a correct scope allows you to pilot and then move into production faster versus, hey, we have this monolithic process that takes 3 years to execute in the real world. In order to have AI ever do it, we have to see how it works. And it's going to take months and years to actually operationalize. I think it's having something that you can do quickly to see how the value comes in real life. And I think that value in the second one, oftentimes people think about AI, the benefits, the ROI. I know there was that MIT study that came out months ago that everyone sort of blew up and misinterpreted and said, hey, there's no value on 95% of AI projects. It's a waste of time, because they literally just looked of, hey, in companies that mention AI in their investor reports or in their public investor relations content, how many saw a value in the bottom line based on that ROI, based on AI, which is a silly methodology to figure out the value. I think, as you both talked about, there's obviously value with AI right now, being able to do things a little bit faster, being able to free people's time, as you said, Tiffany, to do higher level activities. But I also think, and you talked about this a little bit earlier, Jamie, copying and pasting, filling forms, things like that. That's something that is not difficult to do. But if you do it frequently enough, you're going to mess up just because your attention span differs and disappears. So I think you're able to see a lot of benefits around AI being applied to processes that aren't just, hey, it's 30% faster. So I think those are some of the things we've seen. And I think both of you touched upon this one about success. It means, hey, you have to understand what the process looks like now and what it looks like in the future. The technology, I hate to say, is sometimes the easy part. Again, plopping on an LLM onto something, having someone have an assistant. We'll talk about assistants versus agents a little bit later. But right now, again, it's not oftentimes the technology, as we saw in the poll earlier, that's what's holding us back. So I guess, Jamie, obviously you talked about how you guys think about there's the making today better versus making tomorrow better. How do you all separate internally what is a viable opportunity to tackle with AI versus someone's just been listening to too many podcasts and thinks the AI is going to change their whole world?
Yeah, I mean, we are trying really hard, and I won't say that we're always successful, right? Like with what is the business value on the other side, right? Like, so that's how we're prioritizing them, short term and longer term. Like the longer term bets, we're still figuring out, I would say, right? Like I don't think we have high quality candidates. And I think some of that is because of exactly what you say on this, right? Like it does require kind of foundational process changes. But I would also add to that the second biggest barrier to me of AI being transformative is the data infrastructure and the data quality and the I spent a lot of time on Gen AI, right? Like our biggest challenge is unlocking the information that exists in the documents that we have, right? Like pharma's biggest output outside of drugs is documents, right? Like, but documents are really hard to use when you're talking about this context. So it's also kind of how do we fix that problem while we're doing the smaller things? But that is how we, from a Takeda standpoint, are looking at it. Like if it doesn't help patient quality, patient experience, if it doesn't help, we have patient trust as the highest kind of value within our organization. But then the secondary one is, right, like we know based off of the market pressures that exist for everybody and kind of where we are from a costing standpoint, like we have to change the game from an efficiency standpoint. We got to get more stuff done with the same or less cost, be that people, outsourcing, whatever you want to do. So if it's not driving that as well, we're not really looking at it.
Okay, so you guys have sort of defined your scope pretty successfully, I'll say, or pretty consistently within your organization. You know how you attack things. I guess, how do you articulate to leadership, hey, what is the timeline to actually seeing some value around things? Again, a lot of people, when we go back to, hey, I'm implementing legacy software, it's, hey, I implemented it, I buy it, it's 18 months later, I have something in production. And that's where I start seeing improvements. What does it look like from an AI perspective? How quickly are you seeing actual tangible benefits?
Yeah, I mean, our goal, and kind of the way we are operationalizing this is we want to have leading indicators that are within the first 6 months. And that could be, if they're bigger, kind of more transformational things, just implementation kind of milestones, right? But for the smaller things, like we want to see a return on quality or a return on compliance or a return on efficiency in within 3 to 6 months of implementing whatever that solution happens to be. Now, that is the leading indicators are rarely true cost reduction, unless we happen to be able to do it with our CRO partners, because nobody minds cutting that, right? Like, but we are actively tracking, like, hey, can we reduce an hour out of somebody's week? Obviously, that doesn't change being able to reduce headcount, right? Like, but it means they can do an hour more work someplace else. And we are tracking it at a very granular level, and then looking at, hey, when we start putting all the Lego pieces together, how do we get to a force multiplier, right? Like get to real potential cost savings or efficiency savings or throughput savings. And that projects out. We kind of go 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and then 2 years, 3 years, kind of on an annual basis, projecting out depending on the scale.
No, that makes sense. I guess, Tiffany, similar question to you both. Hey, how quickly are you seeing value in certain areas? But also, again, I talk about every CEO's hearing about AI. They're talking to their peers, the board's pressuring them. Hey, we need to have efficiencies because of. How do you handle, or how do you reset expectations from leadership when they're like, hey, we need instantaneous improvement for this, or hey, your plan isn't aggressive enough?
Yeah, I would say probably similar to Jamie. We are looking for incremental results that we can demonstrate within 3 to 6 months. I would say in terms of leadership pushing for transformation, as fast as possible. I think what's really critical here is that that drive for transformation cannot be delegated, right? This has to come from the very top. This has to come from our executive teams saying, if you don't adopt, if you don't change, if you aren't willing to change, then this doesn't work for everybody, right? I think there is maybe some low-lying fruit where executives might think, okay, if I give everybody in my enterprise access to ChatGPT, if I give everybody in my enterprise access to Claude Code, access to different LLM endpoints, then we have now created a AI transformation, right? And that's not really what's going to happen. You're not going to have the results that you want if you just give open access to everybody, because what are people going to do? They're going to potentially listen to podcasts. They're going to potentially scroll through LinkedIn, and they're going to see examples, and they're going to say, okay, I'm going to try that out, right? I'm going to ask ChatGPT to create a PowerPoint for me or help me with this presentation. And that's not really the transformation that's going to give you the results that you're looking for. This isn't going to deliver incredible value to your enterprise. It's great to have those tools available. It's great to provide your workforce with early experimentation. But if our leaders, if our executives aren't saying very clearly that AI needs to be a driven transformation and everybody needs to be open to that change, then it's just not going to work. Instead of just giving access to everybody, I think it's important to really focus on taking a risk-based approach and defining some very strategic use cases for the teams that are going to actually deliver this critical value to your enterprise, and then working directly with those teams, bringing in your AI experts, whether you are developing that knowledge internally or you're bringing in knowledge from outside, to really focus on those critical use cases and building out those workflows with your teams and how you can partner with these AI technologies and really demonstrate what can be done through these teams in delivering those results together, not just expecting everybody to take up these tools and then drive their own transformation.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think that's where I'm going to skip through some slides. I think we're going relatively well. We have a lot of stuff to go through, and I like it. I guess I do have one thing on this slide I want to talk about, Jamie. You mentioned obviously data being a challenge. I think, how do we handle, you talked about lots and lots of unstructured data. We create lots of documents, and sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not. Obviously, on a clinical trial perspective, there's lots of interest in tapping into EHR systems, things like that, which have comments fields, notes fields, which are just plain text, things like that. So how do we maximize the value of that leveraging AI? But also, I think Tiffany, and this all the way on the left, like legacy studies, legacy standards, things like that. That's evolving both from a regulated perspective, but also more from a research perspective. As we're trying to train models, as we're trying to evolve AI, how do we give it the right food to be, or the right information to be trained on, knowing that we do a heck of a good job tracking things that work well within our organizations? We don't always do a great job tracking things that didn't work out quite as well as we wanted this. So those bad experiments, or where it didn't quite hit endpoints, and we're like, yeah, we're not going to actually put all our formal documentation around that. So I guess, Jamie, how are you thinking from a development side, tackling data and unstructured content, things like that? And then Tiffany, I'm going to ask you, how do you sort of ensure that you're preparing the right things to train your models on?
I mean, for us, it's a combination. We haven't been very good at standards from a data perspective or a content perspective. So it is definitely putting plans in place for that moving forward. But then it's hedging our bets on, right, we are not going to transform all of the content and all of the data that we have historically into those standards. Like there's not enough money around. So it's how do we provide the appropriate context to get to the second art, Tiffany, which I think is awesome that you added to FAIR, right? Like the repeatability of it, right? Like so that you're getting the same answers, both regardless of who's asking the question, but from our perspective, regardless of which study you're asking it about, right? Like, was it an outsourced study? Was it an acquired study? Is it an active study that's our tier one high focus studies? So it, and then we're looking at, well, how can we use Gen AI and AI to be the bridge between the old way this information was managed and the way we manage it now? Some of it we're going to have to transform, right? Like we're looking at how do you build, data repositories, content repositories, vector databases, things like that to unleash the information that's document based. But again, we're going to have to pick our spots on how we do that. But then how do we get the information that we need? Protocol documents are a big one, right? Like you can learn a lot of it in the history just by getting some of the information out of the protocol documents, and building, digital schedule of activities kind of repositories. So that's our hope right now. We'll see if it works.
All right, excellent. Yeah, so I guess Tiffany, I talked earlier about, again, you have your good data, you have some maybe data that's missing or some less awesome data. How do you decide which data is good enough to build on, to start leveraging AI, start training, et cetera?
I think it really depends on the outcome that you're looking for. You have to evaluate the data that's going into your model based on kind of a fit for purpose use case to say, what is this actually going to impact, right? I think if we think about our early experimentation, our early R&D phase, our preclinical studies, we can consider data that is maybe less clean, maybe has more noise, maybe has more gaps. And then if we're thinking about any decisions that are going to directly impact patients, we absolutely cannot accept data that has potential gaps, potential unacceptable biases or unknown variables within the data set. So I think you have to think about what are you intending the outcome to be, and then really evaluate, is the data that you're putting into this model going to be fit for the decisions that are going to be made as a result of it?
No, I like that risk-based approach, and I think it ties a lot into governance to me. Again, obviously people think of governance, they think of it's all processes, things like that. And obviously there is a big process component to it. But when we talk to customers, oh, I didn't mean to do that. When we talk to customers doing data science, AI work, a big concern or a big focus for them is, hey, we need to put governance and compliance around it. It's not enough to do this cool experiment, to have this cool model, to have this cool automation. If obviously from a FAIR perspective, we can't reproduce it, things like that. From a compliance perspective, when I'm getting ready for submissions, I need to have comfort that when I'm putting this information or these outputs in front of the right folks, that I have confidence in it, both how we got there, that it's right, etc. So I guess obviously compliance or governance traditionally has oftentimes been an IT-led thing. Like they are like, hey, we own the systems, we're going to put governance models in place, things like that. Actually, Jamie, you talked about dealing a lot with CROs. Obviously, there's a lot of governance around, hey, how do you partner with external parties, things like that. So I guess AI is one of those things where I've seen increased span of governance, more and more people getting involved in it. I think, Tiffany, you were 100% right earlier when you said, hey, it has to be a top-down led thing. You can't have both AI or governance be managed by a little quality team in the corner of the back room, that they're not going to have the gravitas or the sway to get things done. It has to be a top-down thing of, hey, we are approaching this in a compliant, informed manner. But I then think, again, it has to be distributed across the various teams involved. Obviously, quality has traditionally helped guide us correctly. IT helps put some of the technology infrastructure in place. But I think the business, especially when we're thinking either trial operations or research designs, things like that, like the people who know the process best have to be heavily involved in defining the governance framework. that controls how AI is, I don't want to say replacing, but is augmenting or replicating their work at times. So I guess to you, Jamie, first of all, like who owns AI risk, AI governance from a Takeda perspective? Is it shared? Is it IT leads? Is it quality owns it? Who's sort of running with it right now?
Yeah, I mean, I would say today it is still very DD&T heavy. Obviously, IT quality has a big component in there as well, but it is evolving. I mean, you even look at, I think it was just last week, EMA and FDA released their kind of I forget what they called it, but like guidelines for AI. And it is very like multidisciplinary, right? Like governance and things like that. And that's where it needs to go. I mean, I think it at at Takeda today, data governance is not very mature, but I think one interesting outcome of all the focus on AI is the business leaders have clearly understood that it's not just this IT thing in a quartermaster data management. It's not just some IT problem that has to go get solved, right? Like that if they don't govern their information, their results are going to be at best not good and at worst, disastrous to the organization. So I think that's going to evolve hopefully quickly. But there's at least an acknowledgement of like, wow, we need to now that we are no longer envisioning a siloed environment and organization where clinical is the only person looking at clinical's data and regulatory is the only person looking at regulatory's content. Like they're understanding that the importance of the quality and the definition and the governance and context of that information.
Very excellent. Yeah. And I guess, Tiffany, same question to you, but also a slightly different flavor. Knowing that Jamie and his team are working with teams that are used to being under sometimes the heavy hand of compliance and quality folks, things like that. And scientists, researchers have traditionally had a little bit more leeway, not necessarily that they don't have compliance concerns, that they don't have GLP, et cetera. But I guess what does the governance look like for you? And how do you bring along scientific teams that are like, hey, this is an extra layer of sort of overhead that I'm not used to?
Yeah, I think, I talked a little bit about providing some freedom to explore earlier,
Mhm.
providing that freedom to explore with the tools, but building in the track trace audit into the the platforms, the technology that you're creating for your scientists to do this experimentation, I think does help with the governance and the compliance and, of course, the traceability. Um, I think as you define those higher value workflows with your teams, it's much easier to then bake in those governance and compliance um, features without hindering really their workflow. I mean, the objective here would be that you you have a platform, you have a set of tools that your scientists can use, and they don't even think about the traceability and the auditability that it's happening at the back end because it's built into the tools that you're using, and you can pull those audits as needed in order to enforce those decisions down the line, but it's not hindering in any way what the scientists are able to do or what they're able to experiment with.
No, I like it. Yeah, I think being able to build compliance, some of the governance processes into the tools that your really smart people are already using without adding additional tools, adding Excel, different logs, things like that. I think that can provide a lot of value. I do want to talk a little bit about some of the predictions I had for the year. And I think some of these we've talked about already, Tiffany, and you talked about how things could look very different. Right now, we think about, hey, we do things very sequentially. We do things, lots of handoffs, things like that. I think we are seeing, especially on the research side, you hear closed loop DMTA systems, things like that. You hear the lab of the future, a lot of this work of, hey, there's going to be ongoing continuous work by robotics, by AI to design experiments, to actually execute them, perform assays, things like that. And then potentially even then iterating on it, be like, hey, we uncovered this. Sometimes they'll go to a scientist for review, change of design experiments, things like that. But also being able to have more autonomous loops and more iterations before a human has to get involved. So I think that's something we're seeing from a research perspective. And obviously, Jamie, you talked a lot about it already around, hey, how do we automate documentation? You talked about the regulatory agencies being like, hey, we know you're going to use AI. We know you're going to use Gen AI, things like that. We're expecting or we're anticipating you using it, and we're expecting that you're going to be able to prove that it was fit for purpose, that it was valid, etc. So I guess these are some of the high level predictions I have. I guess, Tiffany, what is your prediction? Where do you see research going? Where on the research side do you see people being like, you know what, this is something we're going to try to tackle this year?
I am extremely passionate about simulations, and it's not on the slide, but digital twin technologies.
Mhm.
I think maybe important to call out the difference between simulations and digital twins is a twin actually has a feedback loop that's incorporated with its real world entity. But I do see huge progress being made in the simulation space where we can look at first designing virtual in vitro and in vivo experimentations to test potentially dosages or study designs or provide initial feedback for hypotheses. And then, as we talked about in that example of our design of experiments and enabling our scientists to handle more and more complexity, I think we can look at how do we potentially apply some of these co-pilots, some of these autonomous researchers to help translate the results of those simulations into actual actionable workflows for our scientists to consider.
Awesome, I like it. I guess, Terry, from your side, where do you see people dipping their toe in the most this year from a more development side perspective?
Yeah, I mean, at least for us, it's still heavily on the document generation side, right? Like, how do we both create the documents, but also begin to manage the information that creates those documents? One, to just fix the now, but also getting towards, right, like, we will have a world, I hope soon, but we'll see, right, where we are no longer submitting documents to health authorities, right? We are submitting the data and maybe some contextual information around the data. So I mean, it's a little bit funny that we'll spend all this time on document generation just to hopefully eventually eliminate document generation. But I do see that as a heavy area on the development side. And then again, as I talked about earlier, like just the automating the transactional stuff to get that low value but necessary work out or reduce it, if not eliminate it, right, from the humans. Exactly what you'd said earlier, right? Put their focus on the strategy and the design and the important work, not just, rekeying data 35 places and re-SDVing data, over and over again.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, my last slide again, we've seen this. I think Jamie and Tiffany both talked about this. Pick use cases from a leadership perspective or business process perspective that you're going to be able to see tangible results in the next 3 to 6 months. Don't promise the world. Don't promise, hey, we're going to change the whole world and everything's going to be perfect in 2.5 years. You won't get the chance to see if it actually works. You need to provide value. You need to provide tangible benefits soon. I think we talked all the way on the right about foundations. Again, Tiffany, you talked a lot about, hey, we're going to have to re-envision our processes. We have to make sure our data is accurate, things like that. I think the change management, both from a process perspective and an org perspective, is going to continue to be challenging. But I think one of the things we talked about that I also like, and it obviously goes very well with FAIR, is how do we build that trust layer? Again, we have to have confidence that anything we produce, be it your new intern, your seasoned researcher, Gen AI, et cetera, when you're generating something, when you're finalizing something, when you're putting something in front of both a compliance person, a regulator, et cetera, you have to have confidence that it's right. And that right means, hey, it's the right output. It reflects reality and it was generated correctly. So I think we've all talked a little bit about compliance, governance, things like that. To me, that's an area that probably a lot of people are struggling with or aren't necessarily incorporating into their process. I've seen some new things on LinkedIn and the news that governance, cybersecurity is where a lot of folks from a leadership perspective are thinking around AI. But I think all of these three things, if you do this, you'll actually have some success with AI in the future. So with that, I know we went a minute or two over. I do want to thank Tiffany and Jamie for their time. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And I guess, Rob, I'll hand it over to you for the close-up.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I was just going to say, obviously we're at the top of the hour just passed. It's been a really insightful, really interesting conversation. From a personal perspective, it's great because there's a lot of the themes that have come out here is also showing up in a survey that we did part of last year. So there's a lot of commonality, a lot of good themes, and the industry, I think, is all, we're all as a group thinking together in the right direction. So that's fantastic. Just for those online, there's a few questions that we've captured that we can do follow up on if necessary. I also saw a couple of hands go up during the presentation. Obviously, we can't have people talking online. It's too many of us here, but if anybody has questions they want to send in, I'm sure that between us we can make sure that we come up with some answers for people and get back to them. So just to say again, thank you, Tiffany, James, Chris. Fantastic meeting, and look forward to speaking to you all again soon.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone.